Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Bo. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Ben Beard from Mithril Security. I've previously had 15 years with the Australian government in the T4 protective security area, providing protective security advice for security zones, risk reviews, and anti-terrorism mitigations. I've been a member of the ACT chapter quite a while now, and currently the Assistant Regional Vice President for Digital and Communication. So hopefully all of the tech works tonight. Last year, I started a diploma of training, design and development with the long-term plan of starting my own company and running training programs for people that need to meet government security requirements. And as I went through that program, I thought there's a lot of things that I've picked up once we worked through the theories. I've done a lot of presentations, I've done a lot of courses before, but until you actually sit down and work out why some of these things work and why some don't, it was a bit of an eye-opener for me. I'm still very much at the start of my training and education journey. So try and get across some of the key concepts to you tonight, and I'll throw in examples of how we can apply it when we need to get a message across to people from a security outcome. What some research has estimated is that during our leisure time, not counting our work time, our brain is processing something like 34 gigabytes a day just for our downtime activities. And conversely, they've estimated the capacity of the conscious mind to process information is 120 bits per second. To consciously process information, we've got a pretty big deficit against what's coming in. It's estimated that we process more information in a single day than our ancestors did in their entire lifetime as little as 100 years ago. And you want to get someone to listen to your security message? It better be good. You need to know what makes people pay attention and what makes information stick for different people, because our messages are generally at a very broad audience. Just to be clear what this does and doesn't cover before we head into the theories. This is not about tick the box, meet PSPF requirements that you've done your security awareness training. We want to make that as quick and painless as possible so everyone can get on with their day. But if you want to change behavior for a security outcome across a diverse group of people, then I hope you come away from tonight with some tools that you can use. So I'm not sure many people have heard of andragogy, but that is the understanding and science of adult learning, as opposed to pedagogy, which is teaching children. There's some key learning principles that apply specifically to adults, as opposed to education of children. And there's some theories of adult learning that I'd like to get across to you. Some of the learning principles that adults have is they need to have a need to know. It needs to apply to their jobs, because we're typically learning for jobs and our work. Adults bring a wide variety of previous experiences with them, and we need to find a way of acknowledging that in our security awareness training and building on it. And adults learn really well when they're learning from other people in a group rather than just a lecture. Adults are self-directed learners in that they will seek out information when they need to do their jobs better, to solve problems, but they're not as receptive when they're told to go and learn something, as opposed to school education or mandatory security awareness training. Adults will have a readiness to learn. When they are ready to learn something, they will seek out that information. Understanding and retention is greatly enhanced if there's a problem to solve from the training. And adults are almost always intrinsically motivated. So that motivation to do the learning and education needs to come from within, as opposed to the approach to teaching children where you apply a lot of extrinsic motivation. The motivation's coming from outside sources. If I do this, then I'll get this reward. It doesn't work as well with adults, and it doesn't provide as good learning outcomes. Some of the theories for adult learning is that first and last impression. So I'm sure we've all done a training course, probably with quite a good qualified trainer, where they've said all their statements up front, they've said their learning objectives, and then you work through all of the problems, and then they've repeated them all at the end. That's because research shows that the first thing and that last thing in the training package is more likely for us to recall it later. Adults like active learning. They need to get involved in the process. That one's a really good point for distinguishing between lecturing and teaching. I've realized I've given a lot of lectures over the years, and I probably haven't done that much teaching. Now, having been through my diploma and applying it to training people in my previous role and in my company now, it's much more useful to engage people as you go. They'll have a better experience and they'll remember more. It needs to be rewarding training, and it's not, you get a lolly if you complete your homework sort of thing. Adults, like we've said, intrinsically motivated, problem-centered, so it needs to reward them somehow. They need to get feedback. It needs to be meaningful material, as in relevant to the individual person. From our perspective, we need to find a way of making some of the messages we try and get across meaningful to people that will have no interaction with an adversary from a security perspective, never intend to, don't think about it. How do you make a construction worker interested in foreign intelligence services? That's a pretty big leap, one between the other. But if you take something that's meaningful to them, the construction industry is very focused on safety, looking after your mates on site. And if you can frame it in that way, that, you're looking after your mates because someone is bullying them. And that's all foreign interference is. It's bullying and harassment, just happens to have a foreign power behind it. If you can get that message and make it meaningful for them, you're going to get better retention, better engagement, and a better security outcome. Multisensory learning is a little difficult to do over online classroom or webinar. We can hit two with visual and audible, but it's a little hard to do any of the others. Thankfully, about 70% of communication is visual. When we're trying to make a point, we can use our visual cues, change things up, and get better engagement and better retention for an improved security behavior outcome from our audience. Adults need feedback from their learning, and it's not just, good job, you sat down and did your mandatory training. It's, how am I applying this? Am I doing well? How can I improve it? All the things that we want from a good manager is that level of feedback to both vindicate what we're doing and show us where the next steps are. And practice and reinforcement of the training is really important for adults to learn a new skill or a new behavior. And that's both an opportunity to practice in a safe environment, what they've learned, so without being thrown straight back into the wild, and a touch point back so they can understand if they're applying that activity appropriately. There are a few different learning styles and information processing types that different people will have, and these are pretty evenly distributed throughout the population. So when we're creating and reviewing our security education programs or our activity where we're trying to communicate, we need to have a point where we go back, look at our content and see, have I got something in there for all of these different people? Activists like to jump in and get going, do something. They're the leading from the front, high energy people that we all know and is not me. I'm a reflector. I like time to take in the information, think about it, process it, pull in other experiences and other information that I have, then make a decision. We have some people who are theorists. And they'll respond really well to a theory behind a security outcome. But if you try and give the theory to the activists, they're not going to respond so well. And there are pragmatists. They want to know from their training, what can I do with it? How can I take this information that you've given me and apply it to my job? The information processing types, we have visual learners. One of the courses that I run with my company is Design, Build and Manage Security Zones. It's taking the policy objectives and the technical note requirements and applying them to get a good outcome. It's a very dry sort of topic when you're trying to explain it by text or just by talking. I've created some 3D models, and the visual learners just lose their minds. They think it's great. So this would be several pages of text in the PSPF and the technical notes. Put it into a visual representation with cutaways and different options. And people can see it all at once, take in a lot of that information. And if your information processing type if you have a preference for visual information, this is going to be really useful for you to put things into context.
Is that still sheet and plywood?
I'm trying to demonstrate that you can have one or the other without just doing another set of walls. We have auditory tonal information processing styles. So people that like listening, if you want to target them, then maybe a podcast is a good way of getting that across. They like to focus on just the sound coming in, the words and information that's coming at them, and they don't like a lot of other distractions to go with it. Kinesthetic people, information processing types, they like to get hands-on, which is great. It's probably team it up with the activists and got a bit of a powerhouse charging ahead. But some of the things we can do is giving them samples to show them how different bits of security equipment work. So if we want to explain to them how a keying system fits together, then we can give them a sample like this, cutaway, which explains the concepts, show them how it works. They get to play with it. They get to feel, do something. And then we've used that to reinforce our message saying that, well, you may want to upgrade your keying system because that's easily defeatable because you can see how the mechanism works. You've had to play with it already. Then we have the auditory digital information processing types like myself. We like to take everything on and then run a bit of an internal monologue. So the people that actually you can see the gears turning, that's what they're doing. They like to take the information they're receiving, synthesize it, and then put a narrative in their own mind to really take all the information in and retain it. So I sent out a few surveys before the webinar got started on the chat, and some of you might know your learning style, your information processing type already, and some of you can make a guess based on a bit of self-awareness and how you like to learn things. So we'll try a poll. Yeah, we'll get a snapshot, read it out. Yeah.
Okay, so 28% of people in the first question of which is your learning style, we've got 28% of people said they're activist, 33% reflector, 11 theorist, and 28% were pragmatist. So reflector came in at 33. And in what is your information processing style, 61% came back with visual, nil came back for auditory or tonal, 33% came back for kinesthetic, and 6% came back with auditory digital. So overwhelmingly visual.
Yeah, and that sort of shows in the effectiveness of visual as a communication method as well, because you're hitting a high number of people. So you can see just from our small group, we're all in a similar field and interested in this topic and security. We've still got a really wide spread of the different learning styles and information processing types. So if you need to hit everyone in an organization or in a group that you're trying to get your security message across to, then you need to have different ways of achieving that, because we've got some of us who like to sit back and reflect, and then the activists want to get in and do something. It can be really hard to balance that out. The other aspect that we have is the dreaded Myers-Briggs personality traits. I'm sure we've all done them, but it's a useful tool as well to work out how to land your message if you have particular people in mind. Some organizations will be overwhelmingly in a particular category, or in a particular quadrant of the Myers-Briggs chart. And that means that different methods of communication will work well with them. If you are working in an organization that's full of extroverts and activists, and getting them to jump in and do a role play as part of your security message. So what might a foreign intelligence service approach feel like? What will it look like? Actually getting them to jump in and do it. You try and do that to a bunch of introverts, they're not going to respond well. They would dread doing a role play. Yeah, so lots of other aspects to the Myers-Briggs approach that you can have a look at. And I put in the chat earlier the 16 personalities site. And that's actually a really fun one to do and compare it to your spouse and then work out why some things cause more conflict than others. You can actually find the answers in there. There are a lot of models to how you should structure and design your security education activity. I've picked a couple up here to explain and make a particular point. I think almost all of us have heard of the 70-20-10 approach to training and development. Most of your learning is done on the job, practicing either with a mentor or in a controlled environment, and then starting to apply that in different areas. The 20% is feedback from line managers and clients, what you do on the job and how you're doing it, because we take great stock in how other people perceive us. So when we get feedback, we learn from that more than sitting and listening to someone talk for 45 minutes. But be gentle at the end if you've got some really strong feedback for me. And then, the 10% is training. That's a good way of getting the theory across early and starting some initial changes in behavior, but it needs to be backed up with the 20 and the 70 to really reinforce and take it from something that someone's listened to something that they take on and act. So if you're trying to increase security awareness as people leave the building, then you can do your presentation, but just be aware that that's only going to give you 10% of the whole outcome. That cycle of doing something when you're trying to learn a new skill, you want to try it out, reflect on what happened and how your performance was, draw some conclusions from the activity, and then you want to apply it in the real world. And you can jump in at any of those points in your security education program, because as you work your way around with the different approaches to get the behavioral change, you'll then start including all of those different information processing and learner types. There are lots of other models available around. Some are very detailed, some are quite simple. Talking to training and education specialists and working out what will work in your context. I'm a big fan of problem-based learning. I like to give people short problems that they will experience in the real world, send them away to do some of their own research out of the session, and then come back together with a group of people and we can all compare notes on our thought processes there. So what does this mean for you and your security education efforts? It really comes down to these 5 things, I believe. You need to make sure that it is regular. If we go back to the points I made at the start, we're processing a lot of information every day. And even if you're just trying to fit in around sickness and leave and make sure you hit every person in the organization, you need to make sure that it is repeated. A one-off will not do. It needs to be varied. So we're still targeting the same security objective, the same behavioral change that we want, but how we do it needs to vary. If it's the exact same presentation from last year, people will switch off in the first 30 seconds. It needs to be relevant. So we talked about relating it back to the role. And that's really an understanding on our part what the role of, what the outcomes, the objectives, for the organization are, and how does security play into that. Once we understand that, then we can find a way to link it to everyone's day job as they contribute to the broader organization or government department. But you need to find the hook that makes it realistic. It needs to be engaging. That can be challenging at times. It's hard to do. It is probably not the job for an introvert. So working in a team and getting the people with the personalities up the front is a good way of doing that, having everyone work towards their strengths. and it needs to be supported and supported from the top down. You will not get any cultural change, let alone security cultural change, if it is not supported across the organization, top to bottom. It's all driven from the top. Sometimes that's really good. Sometimes that's not so good. But an understanding of where the organization as a whole needs to go with your behavioral change, if you've got trying to work on a particular aspect of staff security behavior, and acceptance and approval from the top, and then full support for the program. So what does this mean for developing your security education program? Yeah, it's going to take a lot longer. If you want to hit the vast majority of a group of people, you need those varied approaches, different methods of applying it, and a coordinated program all the way through. And it takes time. It takes time to develop it, and it takes time to deploy it as well. But if the objective is retention of the message and behavioral change to fulfill a security outcome, then you need to get the support to do that, and need to make sure that people are aware it's going to take up time, both your time and the people that are listening to the message. That's the key points that I wanted to get across to you tonight. I hope you learned something, found it interesting. It would be great if we could get some discussion going. Like I said, I'm only at the start of my journey, but found some good resources. I've enjoyed applying it so far, and happy to share my experiences. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I might just throw it open. There's only a small group tonight, so is there anyone with any questions to Ben? Otherwise, I can start bombarding him. I'll start. James actually brought one of the real questions up I saw was one of the most important things about security awareness from his perspective was the relevance. It shouldn't just be a tick and flick, otherwise it's of nothing.
Yeah, very true. If it's a mandated once a year training, you are not going to get good engagement.
Somebody should tell defense that.
Stop it.
Yeah, but some things, some training, defense does really well. That's
absolutely
the fantastic approaches to doing their core jobs. So the thing is linking it into that and making it relevant to what their objectives are and what they need to do.
To me, the biggest thing that they fail to do, and this is what I would suggest from my experience, 90% of education that's out there is that they fail to make it measurable. They don't associate with, like, if we're doing this education product, what is the skill? What is the capability? You know, the task I want you to be able to do, or the knowledge I want you to have, or what I want you to do. What is then measurable about it? How do I measure whether it's useful? Because if you don't put a measure to it, why are you doing it? If it's not reducing a risk or mitigating something or going towards an end goal where, you know, people do, and sometimes it's going to be a little bit soft in terms of measurables like contact reporting or something like that. But if you don't have something there to measure it by, or at least show by it, then that's when it just becomes that tick and flick every year because we have to. It's so easy to do it. Because if you can't say at the end of the year, why did we do it? What do we get from it? Yeah, and I've hardly ever seen it. It's amazing. Even in an attorney general, it was the same, you know, all the time. What do you want from it? And it's amazing when you say to people, when you're developing training and you say, what do you want from it? What is it, the risk that you want it to treat, or the threat or the vulnerability or whatever? What do you want from it at the end? And what sort of improvement do you want? Start from right from that point. Everything else is just how you get there. But unless you have that at the end of the year and say, why do we spend all this money and time, and actually be able to demonstrate something out of it, why did you do it in the first place?
I think sometimes people don't want to admit to the actual answer either.
No, they don't.
Sometimes it's, oh, we just needed to be seen doing something to make people feel better. Well, that's a measurable outcome.
Security theater is still a measurable outcome. If all it was there to do was to give people a sense of that the security team is there to do something, like the inductions, when we induct new people into a building, It's really there just to the purpose of it is to introduce them to the security team so they know who we are. That's what its purpose is. Everything else around it, all the information, all that, it's fluff. It's them there so that if they walk away knowing security's there to help, and this is who you come to and ask questions, that induction is achieved its purpose. And that should be measurable. If we know that new people are going to come to the security team and they reach out and ask questions, that's our measurable. That's what we want to know. Everything else in the induction is not important. Doesn't matter if they know what floor does what or how to do anything. It's whether they'll reach out to the security team and ask questions. And if they feel comfortable to do that, the induction has done its job.
That's still an important function. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Information coming in.
Yeah, but it's measurable, and it's measurable because we look at it. We say when someone's new, how long does it take them to contact the security department to ask a question?
Good one.
Because if they know you're there to help, they'll ask questions. And it's great. We'll get something. And it could be something as stupid as, how do I get in after hours? Not a problem. We've got a measurable.
Yeah, it's a great point. How do you justify this expenditure in a training program? Yes, I agree. Making it measurable would be excellent.
Yeah.
Manfred, had a question?
Hey, sorry for being late. I've miscalculated the time from Northern Territory and in Canberra. Maybe you've covered it before me getting in, but you've talked about support from the organization in regards to education. I'm hitting a wall at the moment. Mind you, my level is at the moment I'm a security guard, but the business unit is really small, so everyone gets to chip in on what they want to do or not. But I'm hitting a point in getting support from the management to create a different way of training because our environment is different. Do you have any ideas on how to create awareness or for them to start supporting a different way of training?
Yeah, so most of the elements that we went through, you can apply just as much to training someone else as you can to communicating a message upwards. You need to know what their interests are, what they see value in, and what their objective is for the organisation. And then what their preference is for receiving that information from you. So if you go to upper management, and I think there's a sort of similar question there from Craig as well, ask them how they want to receive the information. If they only want visual presentations and you're sending through a 100-page report, they're not going to read it and your message is not going to land. So you need to know how they like receiving information and speaking in their terms. It's always good for a different audience to understand what they're concerned with and then linking that to what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
No problem.
I think we've got another one from John.
Yeah, I was just going to add in there that I find it very important to communicate the why when you're training. So not just this is what we're going to do and this is what it does, but the why. So at the very beginning, it's good to communicate why we're going to do a particular task, why we're going to do something particular, what it achieves at the end. I find that quite useful in the training I do with Type 1A. Even like particular features. So there might be a reason why that particular feature exists, and it's good to use real life scenarios as to why you might use that feature. What does that feature provide the end user, and then the how on to actually achieve that result. And try and keep that all very short and sweet in a quick conversation, give them a quick demo. My high security training is very different to normal Gallagher training where it's very step by step. Mine is a demonstration of the product, how it works, how to do it. And this is what I want you to do and go and do it hands-on and learn it. So it is a little bit different, but it's always good to communicate, the why. I think the why kind of gets people engaged a little bit more as well. so they have an outcome at the end of what they want to achieve, rather than this is kind of what it does. Doesn't really make much sense to me, to be honest.
Yeah, that's great. I've listening to you describe your training, and I'm just ticking off all the different learner styles and information processing styles as we go. So it needs to be that making it relevant to them is, why do I need to know this? What is the benefit of knowing this? Then you get better engagement and better retention. Yeah,
I mean, I had a guy today, and we're talking about like dual authorization going into areas. So no lane areas, for example, and their statement was, "Oh, we don't do that on site." I'm like, "But do you?" And they're like, "I don't know." And I'm like, "You may not have the feature with your current system, but if you actually look at what you're doing on site and who's escorting you," I'm like, "Are there two people?" And the answer was yes. So it's yes, you're doing it, but you don't have something that enforces that process. So then kind of they understood, okay, so we are doing that process, but there's nothing that enforces it. So now they have something that they can work towards. Yeah, and the pragmatists love that. They have something to take away and apply. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I think we've got another one from Christy.
Thanks, guys. Hi, Ben. So my question's about the delivery of training and what you find has been the most successful, and that would be between face-to-face and online learning. And I don't mean like the big online courses like we do with Defence around the campus type delivery training, but more at a unit level. If you've got a secure facility with maybe, 50 or so residents, and the delivery of training to that sort of audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had a few different experiences with it. The most personal example is I got 2 new staff members in my team, and then we went into lockdown. So we sort of had to do online training. And it was good to get some things across, good to get exposure to the different theories. We could go through documents, we could go through processes, but it was very hard to get experience in doing the job role. And it was hard to practice that. So I had people working from home doing security zone inspections on their children's bedroom, just to get them to go through that process and look at everything and work through it. And it was not quite the same. But then we ended up doing a few blended sort of activities as well. So we could hit a bunch of people in a conference room, and then we'd have a few more dialing in. The online is a way of reaching people that are geographically dispersed. That's the best thing about it. I mean, just look at our sort of attendees tonight. We've got just about every state in Australia attending, which is awesome. So that's the real benefit of it, but you lose the hands-on. So that cuts out some of the learning types, and it's hard to do practice activities. Yeah. There's ways around it. So in my course, I'd send the people away over the weekend to do an inspection, and we all come back and compare notes. And it's good because that's interacting with your peers, and that's good for retention and learning and engagement.
Great, thank you.
No straight answer, but yeah, strengths and weaknesses to both.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I can probably add to that as well. So with Gallagher, all our training historically has been face-to-face, and COVID threw a spanner in that works as well. And we needed to continue training, and we kind of pivoted. We didn't have an online platform at the time. It was kind of spoken about and getting developed. And we basically looked around for software solutions, and we went with a hybrid model. So basically we still send the kits out to people. We individualize the kits. We send them out to people all around basically Australia, and we all meet virtually. We have access to their laptop, so we had some software so we could see what they were doing at that time. We used Teams as well. And so we did a hybrid approach. And I still think that was probably the best way to do it during those times. Now that we're face-to-face again, it's great. But it is as well tailoring your approach to the classroom. When you do remote training, it's it's a lot slower. You can't get as technical, like there's going to be questions. And I always encourage the room to speak up and talk. The worst question is the one that's not asked. And it's kind of hard to get everyone to engage. So if you are doing anything remote or virtual, just constantly reiterate that, come on, ask some questions, because face-to-face you would be getting bombarded with questions.
Yeah. It's a hard skill to learn when you're presenting, to pause and wait for that question, and then you think you've waited enough, and then you got to keep waiting as well anyway, just to make sure other people become uncomfortable. It's even longer because they've got to come off mute when you're doing it online. So there's extra actions in there. And I'm pretty comfortable at the waiting, to be honest. I've got that skill down, but you need to adapt it. And sometimes, especially online, I think you need to pull it out of people a lot more. So going through the group and actually targeting a question at each person to make sure they're all engaged. Because some people turn their camera off and go and do something else.
Yes, I've seen that occur as well. Ray Anderson up in Darwin.
All right, again.
G'day, Manfred. I saw you before down the track. Yes, training via online does have its difficulties, but we've adapted by having the first few minutes. We have general introductions. We get our attendees to talk about themselves, talk about what they've done in their role, and that way it opens up other experiences that can be shared later on. That way I can go back and touch base with these people and say, okay, you had this in your employment in another agency. How did you deal with it then? That way I'm not teaching everything. They're learning from each other. And once it starts going, you find it bounces on and other people start engaging as well, which is a bit different to how I was teaching managers how to use CCTV systems and DVRs, which is more of the old military style of EDI, explain, demonstrate, imitate. Because I wanted them to show they're competent at using the equipment before I let them loose with it. So that's face-to-face has got its place. I'm supposed to be doing face-to-face in Adelaide next week. That's now off. But that's where I can reinforce everything they've learned online and bring it down to a personal approach and have them go through not just role-playing, but carry out direct actions. So it's horses for courses, and the style that I adopt changes, depends on who I'm teaching. When I taught in Beijing, my style was so totally different there. It was basically almost direct. You will do it this way, as opposed to working in Australia with other people or in Jakarta, where it's a case of let them engage and let them learn, not off you, but also off each other.
Yeah, those icebreakers at the beginning, so important. And introducing everyone to each other. Then I can turn my camera off. Do we have any other questions in the chat, Bo?
Lots of good conversation. I'm still on mute. I'm sorry, I'm just reading it past quickly. I did like one. I should bring up for everyone. Oh yeah, Raymond was talking about how they do an inclusive style of interaction for introverts who maybe, shy away from role playing and sort of that interactive stuff, and how they're, I think I'm putting words in his mouth, but I took it as, you create a safe space for them so that they can participate, still be there, but in silence.
That's right.
You're not expected.
Because of some of the training that we had in human services, which is now Service Australia, centric, aggression response is a big one. And the agency I'm working for now, once again, we've got not just the aggressive behaviour, but all sorts of other unreasonable behaviour. We have engaged actors to come in as part of role playing, and our staff, who are a lot of them are the telephone operators, go through a scenario. However, it's very realistic. So we have to explain before, during, that this is a safe zone. These are actors. But those of you who don't feel that you can deal with it, you are invited to step out of this, or you can sit in the back and just watch. Out of all the training we've done that way, I've only heard of about 3 or 4 who've actually stepped away from the entire training for that section and come back in later on. Others have sat in there, and they've all got a lot of value out of it. Even the people doing it said they're extremely, I won't say traumatised by it, but it felt so realistic that at times they got a bit confused. But for them, they said it was a great learning curve. But once again, we had to create this safe environment because these actors are quite dynamic and very realistic.
Yeah, and I've applied that a few times, teaching people how to do security inspections. You slowly build on it until they get to a point where they're confident. So you start with the theory, you give them the hands-on items, you then take them through and do everything yourself and do the old EDI. But then as you're giving them the opportunity to practice, you clearly say, this is your opportunity to practice. There are no negative consequences to it. We're trying to learn from the experience. And most people will start to engage that way.
I think the other problem is with people training, they try and take them to the end goal first, rather than realizing it's quite often, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So, with that whole, EBI type stuff, start with small parts, like lots of little small parts, then bring them into groups before you, like a triangle to bring it up. And you see this a lot. People just go straight for the end goal. We're going to show you, with the Gallagher, we're showing you how to do everything. Well, no, show me, this is the logon. This is the settings. This is this, this is this, this is this. All right. This is how you bring it together to do something and so forth, and bring it in chunks and break it down, and then bring those chunks together into groups before you get them to that end result. Don't just go straight for that end result. That can often also make people, especially if they're really overwhelmed with something and uncomfortable, feel a lot better, because they can have short, sharp little successes, which builds confidence, which builds a feeling of capability within themselves. And you can actually then focus on little bits. It's also a great way to learn how their learning is too, because you'll see it in very small, distinct spots and go, okay, that person deals with it that way, that person deals with it in that way, and it allows you then to modify how you present things along the way.
Yeah, totally agree. We have limited information that we can take in from any one session. Short chunks and short skills that you can get across short pieces of information is definitely more effective than going for this is the entirety. I think there's some research that it's 7 pieces of information you can hold in your conscious mind at any one time. So if you exceed that in the first couple of sentences, then you're going to white noise for the rest of the session.
I think I remember a presentation that you did a few years back, Ben. CPNI, it was video CPNI, did a scenario-based event.
Yeah.
The thing that I took from it was there were a bunch of people doing the acting and the scenario, but there was a ton of people just sitting back watching in cameras and control rooms and just observing and getting that measurable stuff, seeing how people responded and acted. And I thought that was very, very insightful to have the extra people to work out the responses in this specific scenario. And if you missed it, you'll have to come to more ACES events. That was an awesome one. But
the CP&I Ascend and how all that works.
Yeah, it was really good.
Having the right people doing the right jobs. Like I know personally from doing all these surveys and learning about it, I'm really good at planning something out, but I'm not the person to take charge in a crisis. I go, my plan's not working anymore. What's going on? I just freeze. So we need the activists and those sort of people to take charge in crisis situations. But they're not so worried about the long-term plan sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Anything else from anyone else? No. Okay. For thank you so much, everyone who came tonight, and all our special regulars and chapter supporters. We really appreciate your time. For the people in the ACT, our next event is going to be posted hopefully tomorrow. It's on the 1st at the usual place. And if you don't have, thanks, Craig. If you don't have access, you can email me or Ben, or get on our LinkedIn page, or our, probably LinkedIn's the best, and we can get you onto our email schedule so you can see these events. But we've got a couple more coming up for the rest of the year, and that leads up into the Security Government Expo in November. So thanks so much, everyone. Oh, Manfred's got a question. Manfred doesn't have a question.
Yeah, just quickly, when you're talking about the LinkedIn page, you got one specific for the ACT, or you're talking about the, okay. Any chance you can send me that link?
Yeah, sure. I'll put it in chat.
There you go. Thanks, Ben. So LinkedIn is the quickest way we get things up. And if you want to let us know more, you can reach out through the LinkedIn page, and we'll get you onto our sort of email distribution list. Shane's our member chair. He does an awesome job letting everyone know sort of the events that are coming up.
And even sharing these events too, Bo. So Manfred, if you missed some of the beginning of it, we've recorded it. So we also have a YouTube page, ACT chapter YouTube page, which we'll publish the presentations on. It just takes us a little bit of time to edit them and upload them, but they do get back up there.
Not everything goes up, just to be transparent, but you know, these sort of webinars ones we do get up, because these are the free events that are open to everyone. We also do some special events for members in ACT. You've got to be here to be part of it.